Hello, my name is Uli Ziemons. I'm one of the co-directors of the Forum Expanded section at the Berlinale, and I'm here today with the makers of 3 of the films from our film selection this year. And these are Alex Gerbolet and Mareike Bernin from Sonne unter Tage, Sun Underground. Welcome. We also have Parastu Anushapur, Faraz Anushapur, and Ryan Furco. They made Surface Rights. Hello. And last but not least, we're also joined by Rafael Castanheira Parode, the director of O Dente do Dragão, Dragon Tooth. Nice to see you all. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us about your films. We're very excited to have all the films in the selection this year and be able to share them with our audience soon. Not all of these films will be presented together as a program during the festival, but we have grouped them together for this conversation as all 3 films investigate places that in one way or another were affected by nuclear radiation, be that either because they were sites where radioactive material was exploited, found, dug up from the ground, or because they were sites where accidents happened involving nuclear material and contamination events took place. And all these films, all of your films, take these incidents and or deposits or findings and as a starting point for investigations into a larger political, historical, and social context that intersect with them or are even caused by them. So before we speak together about these shared interests of your films, and I'd like to ask you to each briefly introduce your films, and then we also have the chance to see a clip. So we'll start with Sonne unter Tage, Sun Underground. Mareike, what can you tell us about your film?
Actually, I will start. No problem. Thank you, Uli. Yes, our film Sun Underground tells, on the one hand, the story of uranium mining in East Germany, in the former GDR, where between 1946 and 1990, a corporation called Wismut mined uranium on a big scale. At a certain point, the Wismut became the 3rd largest uranium supplier in the world, after Canada, for example. And on the other hand, we tell kind of an object history of uranium itself, which interests us as a transformative element, and also the connection between radioactivity and media history, for example. And what holds all these different strands together for us are stories, and is a certain timeline, so to say, of the local resistance against uranium mining that took place in the GDR, the stories of the GDR environmental movements, of residents, of the people who live with the long-term consequences of radiation, so to speak. And in this sense, we also asked ourselves how to make this invisibility of radiation perceptible. And Mareike will say maybe a few more words of our visual approach, if it's okay.
Yeah. Of course, as Alex already said, we were really interested how the environmental movement somehow were struggling to gain knowledge about radioactivity. Even you can't see it in the same way. We were also experimenting with different forms to somehow capture or make something graspable, which you actually can't see with the human eye or with the camera eye. And so we actually decided, first of all, to shoot in the darkness, like in the dark landscapes at night, underground, or like in the museum in the dark. So we actually took light off. And I think this is also connected to the actions of the environmental activists who also like mostly were active at night, for example, hanging up posters or like digging X-ray stripes in the ground. So we actually connected to this, like our darkness, and additional to this, we shot with UV light torches and infrared light cameras. So we were actually working on the end or the opposite ends of the spectrum, you can say, like UV light being very high waves and infrared being very low waves. And by doing this, somehow the image appears really like glowy, like glasses glowing in the dark, archival materials glowing in the dark. And the very rare shoots we did at daytime, which are then shot in infrared spectrum, they look very uncanny. The leaves, they're turning white, the sky becomes brownish. And this way of filming was also used in like military or ecological, for ecological purpose to track somehow the contamination of the country. But in our film, it's more like directing to an unfamiliar uncanniness we also had when we entered the landscape.
Yeah, I want to later get back to that question of how to visualize something that is largely invisible and this question of the uncanny or this feeling of the uncanny. But before we do that, we'll watch a clip from your film and then go on with the introductions.
Wann ist der Anfang?
Sommer 1988. Deutsche Demokratische Republik. Sachsen.
Was siehst du?
Ein Schotterweg am Dorfrand. Zwischen Feldern hindurch bis rüber zum Zaun. Es ist dunkel draußen. Doch da hinten ist alles beleuchtet. Orangefarbenes Licht. Von meinem Fenster aus sende ich Morsezeichen mit meiner Taschenlampe. An, aus und warte auf Antwort.
Was hörst du?
Es vibriert hinter dem Licht. Die Häuser vibrieren, die Türen klappern, das Geschirr klirrt im Schrank. Die Straße bebt. Meine Füße kribbeln. Und dann denke ich, da unten hauen die das Erz. Klack, klack.
Great. So now we'll move on to surface rights. And now I think I remember correctly, Parastu, you were gonna give us a short introduction into the film.
Yes, thank you. So our film is called Surface Rights. Me, Faris, and Ryan, we work together. And the film, it doesn't directly engage nuclear kind of material, but it is mainly around a suburban development in north of Ontario in Canada. And it traces several narratives that starts from this place. And one of the most deepest, the one that goes back more temporally, it's the narrative of uranium mining in north of Canada. And the film as a whole kind of investigates, so looks at the dynamics of private and public property and its role in the development of North American suburbs in general, but specifically this one, and the layers of immigration and movement and exploitation of land that happens in that area specifically. And it's mainly formed around this cathedral that was built by a mining kind of entrepreneur that immigrated to Canada from Slovakia in the 20s, and then was involved in finding uranium in this area very close to this site, Elliott Lake, which later became a very big kind of booming mining area in the 50s, and then it was kind of abandoned shortly after the Americans stopped buying uranium from Canada. So the town becomes a ghost town, but all the remains of what was happening is still found in the lakes that are surrounding there. And there's a indigenous reserve, Serpent River First Nations there, which at some point of the film, we kind of speak to two people, Wesley Day and Joseph All, who when they were teenagers made a zombie film in that site that we knew about but couldn't see. So there was a process of talking to them about their experience making a film with their community. And then in the process, we came to see, we see archives of Wes, who documented the last moments where there was a mining museum that then was torn down, and he went and documented everything. So while we're having this conversation about the film, we also talk about this place that is no longer there and their reflections on being in this kind of space that is affected. And then we trace it back to this cathedral that was built and the suburb that is built around it, and all of that kind of private, it's all private property. And it's kind of thinking about the foundations of place making and ideologies of community that is kind of projected on landscapes that don't belong to that community to begin with.
Yeah, I believe we have the trailer for the film to be shown. And last but not least, we move to Raphael, your film Dragon Tooth. What can you tell us about it?
Well, this film comes from a long-time project that I've been working at, I guess, like 8 years, writing a script for a film. And I mean, it's a project, a very difficult project to go on with. So I never, I couldn't go on with. So in the last 2 years, I started to research some images for this project, and that is about this accident that happened in my hometown, Goiânia, in the central Brazil. And in 1987, there was an accident with a radioactive device of an X-ray that was found in a hospital there. Some some people, the hospital was abandoned, and they found this machine. Some people found this machine and took them to a junkyard and opened it, and they found this radioactive rock, blue rock, and it was like glowing, and it was beautiful for them, and they started manipulating it, and the radiation spread to the city and to the neighbors of these people. So it was a very traumatic accident that happened there, and I was a little bit, not a little bit, I was a lot. For me, it was not just for me, but everyone who lives in Goiânia feels that it is something that is still there, but at the same time, it was erased by the city memory, and the place was. The people tried to forget this accident. At the same time, the victims didn't have are still suffering for the radiation, and they didn't have the support for the government. So it is still something that is not solved in our memory. And at the same time, as I moved from Goiânia to São Paulo, I was also trying to understand my relation with the city, because I think it's not something that we can separate. The way Goiânia was born, and like 50 years later, the accident happened, and everything that is surrounding this. I mean, I think it's all connected. So the film is a way of trying to deal with these images that was erased, or not just erased, but the idea of the images that tries to show something, but they are not showing everything. So I started working with this idea of the contamination of these images, and the erase of the memory, and I think it's something like this.
Well, let's see a clip. Maybe we stay with you, Raphael. I wanted to get back to what I think Alex already alluded to, and what also was mentioned in Parastu's introduction to her film. This question of, or this the making visible of the filmmaking itself. So in each of your films, there is either a film that is talked about or that is produced, or the filmmaking process is made visible. And in your case, Raphael, it's the film material that becomes so visible, the materiality of it, as you already said, as sort of a way of thinking about memory or forgetting or making invisible, but also making visible, right? How do you make radiation visible? It's visible in its effects. So maybe you can talk a bit about how you treated the images to arrive at this effect. I mean, what we saw is quite a sort of strong example of what you do in the film, but it's not just that, but everything that we see, all the material, it's mostly found footage, if not all, is treated in some way and deteriorated.
Well, for me it was difficult because there are no. It's difficult to find images about Goiânia and also from the accident. So it's always the same images that are worked with that other filmmakers and other films deal, and it's something that I was confronted with, because I tried to find more images, but they were not available. And this relation mostly with the images of the accident, for me, they were very hard to work because they are very violent with the victims and with all the incidents. And so I for a long time, I tried to deal with it and I thought that the best way to deal with was to deteriorate this images and to transform them, because in this case, in these images that we saw, these are images from advertisement publicity of Goiânia of the 60s and the 70s. And so for me, these images were the ones that revealed more of the city than the official images that Goiânia has. So at the same time, it's something that I believe I have to say that one thing that dragged me to work with these images was the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss in the Sad Tropics. When he came to Brazil, he went to Goiânia when it was being constructed. So he was there in Goiânia, and he describes his visit to the city when it was building, and he describes it like a very strange place, like a hellish place, because it was very hot and everything, the nature was devastated. And in the end, he uses this metaphor of the dragon that was killed by Cadmus, and with the teeth of the dragon, the city is built and the people grows in the city. So for me, this image was very powerful to deal, and it also deals with, for me, this figure of the dragon that mostly in Japan, for example, the idea of the dragon that transforms because of the radiation. For me, it was something that was connected in some way So I try to explore this metaphor, and because of that, I use some scenes of Fritz Lang's film, The Nibelungs, and I thought that I could use this metaphor linked with these images of Goiânia and of the accident, also to try to question these images from like a pioneer film of a film from the beginning of cinema, and this also different kinds of images that if you look at in the first at first you can't see many things, but when you if I try to take some of this some of these metaphors and the ideas that I had with the manipulation of the images. So I work with a lot of layers and a lot of different kinds of effects to transform these images. And I use also artificial intelligence and mixed with some other techniques of analog film, working with the different kind of textures. And I mean, I wanted to reveal this contamination on these images, because I don't feel that these images are contaminated just by the radiation, but also this idea of progress that was that created the city. Also this idea of modernism and everything that Goiânia is connected, because Goiânia is like an experiment for Brasilia that was built some years later. So there is, I think that they are linked in some way. And the accident with the cesiums 137, it's like it's something that it's part of this growing of the city that is trying always to erase its memory, and it's trying always to suffocate this traumas that it had.
Yeah. And this, I think that's an interesting connection also to Surface Rights, your film. This sort of, I mean, on the one hand, sort of like the monster, in your case, the zombie that the filmmakers you portray kind of use as a metaphor, not just for the radiation. I mean, we don't really know. They kind of explain what causes, the contamination in their film, but it could be a metaphor for different things, or for many things, and power relations that sort of intersect, in their community, or that affect their community. But also the idea of this planned city and suburbia. I think there's some nice interconnections there. So maybe you, Parastu Faraz, or Ryan, you want to speak a bit more about these sort of intersecting kind of ideologies and strands that kind of all to come together in this place that you found. And I would be specifically interested also in the role of religion in this community. And maybe also if you want to speak about that golden calf that we saw in the trailer. I don't know who wants to take this.
I guess I'll start there. Yeah, I guess I maybe could start from the cow that you see at the end of the trailer there, which is a chrome statue of a Holstein cow that was commissioned by the owner of the land where this suburban community has been built, that's called Cathedral Town, which is a suburban community just north of Toronto. And the cow was commissioned as a sort of monument to I mean, this particular prize-winning Holstein cow, which was a show cow owned by Stephen Roman, who is the Slovakian immigrant who owned the uranium mine in Northern Ontario. And this sort of symbol and object of the cow is brought into the suburban community as this sort of symbol of this agricultural history that's sort of projected onto this land. And this sort of idea that before this was a suburb, it was a farm. And this sort of ideal image of nature and this kind of perfect cow. And so you see within the trailer, you see the image of the cow that's placed within the community, but then you sort of move on to see these Holstein show pageants and how these cows are sort of perfected in the eye of these farmers. And so they're being spray painted and kind of groomed into this perfection, but that's also not necessarily natural. And I think just sort of to like link this back to the kind of conversation we're having here about uranium, I think our film in general, I think this sort of question of the invisible and this question of like uranium and radiation being invisible. I think in our film, there's an attempt to sort of make legible or visible the kind of political history and economy that's not legible in the built landscape in Canada. And this is a sort of history of resource extraction and dispossession of Indigenous land. And so the cow kind of, in a way, clouds that, makes invisible those histories. And so that's kind of, there's different symbols at play within the film.
In terms of religion, I guess it comes from, I mean, Stephen Roman escaped communist Slovakia and built this massive cathedral in what he thought was kind of this gesture of resistance and rebellion. And we trace finally through different layers, they try to obscure the land with its farming, agricultural history, but then we know that the wealth really came from uranium mining. That's how he was able to build a gigantic replica of this church that was in his village, homeland, that we kind of see also at some point in the film. We visit the kind of original. And then, so searching, like going back into this, we end up in Serpent River First Nations through this film that these then teenage boys made, and they really, like Wes specifically, didn't want to talk about this metaphoric connections with uranium, but they did want to talk about the images of the mining museum that was destroyed. And then at one moment you see this mural, and they had a lot to say, of course, about religion and its role in their communities and its destruction. And they comment on this mural that used to be in this museum, where there is this perfect harmony within an atom, and there's 9 churches, and then there's everybody happily mining and canoeing and everything's fine, and that's supposed to be the image. And of course it's a very absurd idea, and they both know it, and they've lived it, and they laugh at it they're very kind to just laugh at it, but that is the dynamic that kind of, so that is the kind of the way the church and the religion and these locations get kind of linked together.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I mean, sort of the role of the church in the sort of settler colonial project is very well known, and it's becoming more prevalent also in the last years in relation to residential schools and these things. So that's all also in there in this sort of very complex web that you're weaving. Mareike and Alex, you already touched upon the history. I mean, you also as you said, you're also telling a lot of intersecting histories, that come together in this place and in this material, in the use of it. And you're telling also a story that is sort of crossing a border, the German border, for a certain time span at least. And I'm interested to hear more about this aspect of the anti-nuclear movement, specifically in the GDR, and the environmentalist movement that is, as we learn in your film, I mean, it's sort of dealing with the effects of radiation and of that mining, but then it's also kind of some of the ways that the activists are targeted by Secret Service and police is also then using uranium again, right? So I thought that was like a very interesting sort of twist and circle. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Maybe I would start. I think what is really interesting, because you mentioned this crossing borders. So on the one hand, the Wismut company was just crossing the borders to the Soviet Union because they were digging for uranium, and it was actually, in fact, the third largest uranium mining company in the world in the Cold War. So the uranium was crossing the borders to the Soviet Union. The environmental movement, they were it was small groups, individuals, but they had contact to West German activists, to activists in the East, and they were like exchanging a lot. And what is really interesting, like also connected to the film before, the church played also a role in this, as the church in East Germany sometimes was like an umbrella to actually hide or like activists. So sometimes it also took a progressive role. So we actually talked a lot to pastors, for example, people who were also involved in like the church. What you were mentioning about being targeted, all of the people in the environmental movement were, of course, targeted by the Secret Service, the so-called Stasi. And this was something we also found out in our research, that the Stasi in the 70s actually used radioactive material, different isotopes, to track people, to literally shoot like little drops on their clothes and to literally track them with Geiger counters, or to mark documents and to track which ways they were going in the post and so on. And this was, of course, very, very dangerous. And we took this term decomposition, Zersetzung, which is very common in East Germany, which is a synonym for actually destroying groups, destroying the individuality of people who revolted against the regime. We took this term, very literally and reconnected it also to uranium itself, as it is decaying and decompositioning through time.
We're almost already out of time, unfortunately, which is a shame. But I was just one last thing that I wanted to mention I was thinking, I mean, it was sort of triggered by your film, Raphael, because you also use this kind of idea of projecting into the future, right? At a certain point, the film says now 3,000 years later, and the city is still contaminated, and that this idea of half-life, right? That certain events have a long half-life, and I think that's also something that is worked through in all of your films, these sort of long-lasting effects of either single events or sort of ideological frameworks that were put into place. I don't have a specific question to that, but maybe I don't know if any of you wants to sort of take that up and run with that idea. Was that something that you were also thinking about? Was that sort of like a metaphor, or, I know not all of you were sort of specifically thinking about uranium and radiation when you made the film, but is that something that you can kind of connect with your film in a way?
In our case, it definitely was something we dealt with, these different times. So the time that uranium has is like, I mean, uranium is used also to measure or to say, like, when our universe, Earth started. So 4.5 million years ago. So it's the chain, the decay from uranium to what is it called, like Blei?
Lead.
Lead, exactly. So it's used to measure the time of the Earth. So, and on the other hand, so when we started to research and when we started to put together the, let's say, dramaturgy of our film, we used like the decay chain of uranium as one like timeline, so to say, and then the environmental movement has another timeline that started later and had the shorter half-life, so to say. And then there's the timeline of the corporation, etc. And so from there, we started to weave a narrative with all the different timelines and layers and time spans also that goes from far past to the future, because radiation has no end, so to say.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it was there was a big question for me, because when I researched mostly about the victims, something that for me it was very violent. It was that all the things that the victims had, I mean, photographs, clothes, everything was put in this grave of in a city near Goiânia. So like animals, and I mean everything they had was put in there because they were all contaminated. And a question that for me it was important, it was like when this half-life ended, like in 300 years, how would this material would be if somebody would excavate it and take it from the earth? How would this materials would be? And at the same time, I thought that the radiation, this half-life of these materials would be ended. Maybe, I don't know, but others radioactive devices would be opened and the radiation would continue to be spread. So it wouldn't be ended at that time. So for me, this journey to like the future was important to look on how the idea, how the pursuit for the progress and the idea of civilization and this would go into the future.
Okay, I think we have to come to an end. It was really nice to see you all. Thank you again for taking the time, and thank you for your films, and can't wait to meet you all in Berlin. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.